Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. So, for the past 18 months or so, local tech ecosystems, especially those over in Europe, have basically been thriving on this one massive underlying assumption. And that assumption is that frontier class, open weight AI models are just going to keep coming. But lately, I've been really digging into the data and watching these sudden policy shifts, and we kind of have to ask ourselves a pretty uncomfortable question. Is the open weight window actually starting to close? This right here is the fundamental question we have to grapple with. Will the absolute best AI models always be open and free? Up until now, the economic case for sovereign, self-hosted AI has been quietly, steadily compounding, right? But that's entirely because of a really generous policy environment. We've got to challenge this load-bearing assumption, the idea that these incredibly powerful weights will continually be published for free. Well, it might just be a temporary phase. Think of it like an open window that's currently being seriously stress-tested by global superpowers. To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this dependency, just think about this for a second. 4 in 8. Recently, we literally saw 4 frontier-class open models released in a span of just 8 short weeks. And what's absolutely crucial to note here is where they came from. 4 of the top 5 open weight families are now Chinese. The entire self-hosted ecosystem out there completely relies on this staggering, rapid-fire cadence of open releases just to stay competitive. Which brings us to the core concept of today's explainer, the open window. This is a highly fragile policy period. And notice that word, policy. This generous licensing we've been enjoying, it's not a law of physics. It's a deliberate, strategic choice being made by the nations and the labs creating these models. And here is the big warning sign. In just the past 4 weeks, both superpowers, the United States and China, have visibly put their hands on the doors of this open window. Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1, the American door. Gating becomes operating procedure. Let's walk through this absolutely wild sequence of events from June, because it happened fast. On June 2nd, Executive Order 1449 drops, and that established classified capability benchmarks in these voluntary 30-day pre-release government windows. Then, boom, right in the middle of the month, June 12th and 13th, the Commerce Department invokes unprecedented export controls against Anthropic. And finally, by June 26th, OpenAI previews GPT 5.6 Sol under a staggered customer-by-customer government approval process. I mean, within a single month, the whole regulatory landscape just shifted dramatically. The impact of those mid-June export controls is totally fascinating. So the Commerce Department temporarily barred global access by foreign nationals to Anthropic's Claude Fable 5 and Mythos 5 models, and this was all over a reported jailbreak trigger. Now, Anthropic publicly disputed whether recalling a widely deployed model over this was actually proportional, and yeah, the controls were eventually lifted. But honestly, whatever your stance on the merits of that ban, this episode demonstrated incredibly clearly that Washington can and will gate a closed frontier model mid-deployment. That temporary ban taught non-US governments a very harsh lesson about how reliable American AI supply really is. So, the structural consequence of all this is pretty crystal clear. The US can gate its closed models, sure, but it absolutely cannot gate published weights once they're out in the wild. When the US gated Anthropic's models, it essentially created a massive marketing opportunity for open alternatives. In fact, China's GLM 5.2 launched roughly 24 hours after those export controls hit. Gated American models just make ungateable open alternatives look incredibly attractive. Why? Because published weights sitting on a hard drive literally can't be unshipped by a government kill switch. Moving right along. Section 2, the Chinese door, July's strategic countermove. Okay, fast forward to July 7th. An exclusive Reuters report reveals that China's Ministry of Commerce, MOFCOM, spent the entire preceding month in closed-door talks with tech giants. We're talking Alibaba, ByteDance, and ZAI. And the topic of conversation? Keeping their absolute best AI at home. This explicitly included discussions about restricting overseas access to models that haven't been released yet, and, critically, future open-weight releases. Now, no final decree was issued, but the fact that these high-level policy discussions are happening right now with those specific named participants, that is incredibly significant. We're starting to see a very distinct difference in strategy emerge here. The American approach has really leaned toward abrupt, mid-deployment gating and recalls of closed models. But the Chinese approach? It leans toward what legal experts in a May's Supreme People's Court Journal roundtable actually called tiered open source AI governance. So instead of sudden shutdowns, it's this structural framework. The frontier-tier models might ship strictly behind APIs, while the lower-tier models remain completely open to everyone.
And the crazy thing is, we're seeing this tiering strategy play out in the market right now. Look at Alibaba. They released Qwen 3.6 completely open under a highly permissive Apache 2.0 license. Amazing, right? But for their strongest, most capable model, Qwen 3.7 Max, nope. That was placed firmly behind a closed API. It's practically a textbook example of keeping all those soft power benefits of open source at the mid-tier while keeping your absolute best merchandise safely behind the counter.
All right, section 3, the gating logic. Why superpowers converge. So why is this happening? Well, a rational Beijing has massive incentives to keep the window open for sure. Shipping open weights is just brilliant industrial strategy. It makes Chinese models the global default. It drives adoption of their standards and tooling. I mean, it acts as incredible soft power. But on the flip side of that coin, they face intense political pressure to narrow access. Why? National security symmetry. The exact same logic that makes advanced, cyber-capable models a huge concern in Washington makes them a massive concern in Beijing, too. And then, of course, there is the distillation war. This is where competitors literally use a top-tier model's own outputs to cheaply train their own competing systems. Back in June, Anthropic told U.S. senators that Alibaba actually ran the largest known unauthorized distillation attack on its models. Now, just to be clear, Alibaba has not conceded that characterization at all. But regardless, the strategic reality remains the same. Once a nation leads in AI, their models become the primary target for distillation by competitors. So great powers converge on gating for one very simple reason. It's exactly what you do when you believe you've got the technological lead and you really want to protect it. Which brings us to Section 4, Europe's survival playbook. So what does a local-first ecosystem pragmatically do to survive all this? Here are 5 concrete moves you've got to take immediately. Number 1, archive now. The current open generation has MIT and Apache licenses. You need to mirror those weights in inference stacks today while it's fully legal and irreversible. Number 2, qualify now. Get in there and benchmark the current generation against your actual workloads while you easily can. Number 3, route for survivability. You absolutely need hybrid architectures, routing workloads across different models using Bifrost patterns, so your infrastructure doesn't rely on a single superpower's door staying open. Number 4, price the dependency honestly. Start acknowledging the real policy risk of importing your model layer. And number 5, fund the domestic layer. You have to have a fallback tier that you control, so that if the window does close, it's just an inconvenience and not a total existential crisis. Honestly, it is a massive, massive strategic error for Europe, or frankly any dependent region, to just treat this superpower standoff like a spectator sport. Assumptions that are this load-bearing, they must get stress-tested deliberately before someone else tests them for you. Which leaves us with this final, truly critical question to watch. The practical issue isn't really whether existing models like GLM 5.2 are going to vanish. They won't. The real question for the entire future of the open weight window is about the refresh cycle. When the next generation hits, will GLM 6 ship open at launch? We're not going to find the answer to that in a policy paper. We're going to find out when we see the actual launch mode. So keep your eyes on those launch posts, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. Keep archiving, keep building, and definitely stay curious.